Left 4 Dead will never stop being fun. Even for someone who hasn't played since the late 2000s, it's incredibly easy to hop into a game with friends and have an absolute blast. Between tight responsive gameplay and pivotal decisions made during development, not one playthrough will be the same as the last. Turtlerock Studios struck gold with their 4-player cooperative shooter and, without hyperbole, rejuvenated the co-op shooter genre. Released on November 17, 2008, Left 4 Dead came into a market that slowly began to shy away from co-op-centered gameplay, and that was its greatest advantage. It tapped into the needs of a niche audience, and once it gained popularity, helped make the audience grow further than it ever had. How it went about this is what I will be discussing today. It's easy to conceptualize a cooperative shooter, or at least one with cooperative elements, but to put it into practice is significantly harder. Often you will have players who simply don't care or understand the idea of playing as a group. It's a common occurrence in shooters where teammates will treat capture the flag as team deathmatch. This stems from how most shooters fail to emphasize cooperation within their core gameplay loop. That's not to say it isn't taken into consideration. However, the goal is often to kill the other team to complete the objective, rather than making you unable to finish it without your teammates. If you're great at the game, the likelihood of completing the objective increases because you're removing obstacles the rest of your team may encounter. Games like Overwatch try to circumvent this by making it harder for one individual to carry the team. Yet it's still possible to do so, therefore it's never truly necessary to play as a unit. It's just gonna cause more frustration if you don't. What this boils down to is a collection of people who are doing individual tasks to complete a single goal. Where Left 4 Dead differs from this philosophy is that it is nearly impossible for a single player to beat the game. Everything was designed to make sure the players who failed to help their teammates were adequately pushed to the point of understanding cooperation. For starters, the developers did not consider each character to be an individual. They constantly referred to the whole team as the player. By removing the idea of individual players, the developers could focus on making the gameplay loop designed around how the team had to work together. It would no longer be, how does this character work within the group, but rather, how does this game work around the team? That's why the only difference between players is their appearance, because not one character can do something the other can't. Bill, Francis, Lewis, and Zoe are equal in every way, mechanically speaking. You can't use character-specific skills to enhance your survivability. You're forced to rely on your teammates and are punished for not doing so. However, the developers couldn't just punish players for being selfish without giving them the chance to learn from their mistakes. Otherwise, people would find it unnecessarily cruel and leave the game. So instead of creating a system of penalties, the game would lead self-centered players in the right direction. For example, the game doesn't have out-of-bounds damage or invisible tethers forcing players to join their team. Instead, it's the enemy AI that keeps them in check. This keeps the group together because Special Infected, most notably the Hunter and Smoker, can incapacitate a single member and not stop until they're dead. If they catch you off guard and no one's around to help, all you can do is watch helplessly as the character dies in agony. The player learns through trial and error that being a one-man army isn't gonna fly, but doesn't beat them over the head with it. Unlike BioWare's Anthem, which had one of the most egregious forms of tethering I've ever seen. At launch, you could not so much as stop to gather materials without being forced to join your team, while they were at best 15 seconds away. The decision was made with good intentions, but so awkwardly forced that it became frustrating within a few hours, leading to widespread criticism until it was eventually fixed to elongate the distance. Which just goes to show how successful Left 4 Dead's hands-off approach really was, a combination of great design that naturally pushed the player into good teamwork, while also trusting the players themselves to understand why straying away wasn't the best idea. This doesn't even factor in that a single hit from an infected deals 1 hit point of damage and causes momentum to be temporarily halted. Meaning if a player is caught in a mob rush without any backup, they'll make it out, but not without being moderately damaged as a result. Compounding this issue is the fact that Special Infected tend to appear alongside hordes, and since you're unable to move properly while caught in the rush, you're easy picking. Alongside bosses such as the Tank and Witch, who are nearly impossible to kill by a single player and can knock unsuspecting players down in 1 hit.
Well, oh, that's a witch right there. That's a witch. That's a witch, you idiot!
Yes, that's a witch.
Though it wasn't as if a player was out of the game once they were dead. Any dead player would be revived after a small set of time and rescued from a nearby closet. This encouraged the surviving members to divert from their set path, creating a short-term goal that shook things up, making sure the revived player learned from the consequences of their actions without being out of the fight for too long, and giving the survivors variety. Initially, this wasn't the case, and dead players were revived once everyone else got to the safe house. Yet that ended up taking too long, as stated by developer Chris Ashton.
As the game matured, the time between checkpoints reached 10 to 15 minutes. Clearly too long for a player to sit in spectator mode. It wasn't really clear how to bring dead survivors back into the game in a simple and believable way. Once we hit on the mechanic that you're rescuing a survivor who has barricaded himself in, the problem was solved.
Player survivability wasn't just tied to enemy AI, however. It was also connected to how players would help each other through items in the world. This was accomplished by making sure item sharing and discovery was as seamless as possible. For starters, the user interface was designed to be streamlined because of the fast-paced nature of each campaign and enemy encounter. Any additional steps involved in healing or aiding teammates would slow momentum. Therefore, item sharing was tied to the melee button, instantly giving the necessary item to whoever needed it. Originally, items were found in predetermined but interchangeable locations on the main path. Yet when creating places to spawn infected, they saw players would instinctively go into spawn areas for curiosity's sake. Therefore, late into development, items were procedurally added to closets, bedrooms, and alleyways to reward players for going off the beaten path and in harm's way. Since items were scarce and found randomly, players could never know whether the pipe bomb they carried would be replenishable, keeping them dependent on their teammates when it was inevitably used. Another way the developers assisted players was through light sources scattered across the world. Initially, Left 4 Dead had a much brighter aesthetic to its level design. While the game still took place primarily in the dead of night, buildings had illuminated windows, interior hallways were significantly brighter, and the sky was darker to contrast all of that. During development, the team realized that the overtly bright atmosphere didn't just feel wrong, but players would have no clear understanding of where to go. Like moths to a flame, people tend to see light as enticing, and a sign of safety when in the middle of nowhere. If all the lights remained on, there would be no way to properly convey navigation to the player without being in their face or through waypoints, which went against the team's minimal UI goal. Therefore, most lights from buildings, signs, and interior sections were removed to engulf the city and players in darkness. For instance, most of the lighting in the first mission of No Mercy comes from appliances, cars, and oil drums. The first light sources you see are emergency lighting from the rooftop building. When you go downstairs, the kitchen is illuminated by the open refrigerator and overhead stove light, while the following room has a TV playing nothing but static. This helped flesh out the world by implying the residents were attacked or converted while going about their day-to-day life. When you get to the lower levels, the next major light source comes from a military Humvee that's been smashed into the wall, and an exit sign at the end of the next hallway. This is followed by an oil drum, an abandoned police car, a truck, more fire, and finally, a makeshift emergency light that was established by other survivors. Each one of these lighting sources were placed specifically to draw players' attention in the right direction, and the path the player goes will be determined by what they see first. This directional lighting had a subtle effect on players throughout the campaigns, whether they knew it or not. For example, once they're allowed in the open street, players can go in one of a few directions, each one heightened by organic lighting. If the player were to immediately turn right at the end of the alleyway, they'll notice a bright red street ad next to a door, luring players into a dark confined space with the promise of additional items such as pain pills, but also puts them in danger, whereas the open street allows for safety at the cost of supplementary materials. If the player continues forward, they may notice the truck's high beams on the local building, which could lead them behind said truck towards a secret hallway and discover more items, but again at the risk of being in harm's way. Yet the developers didn't want to make it too easy, so they made one of the cars have an alarm that is set off easily, meaning if anyone sets it off by mistake, then they'll summon the horde and must deal with that before completing the mission. It's clear the developers took time to understand the intricacies of how to ensure cooperation without being overbearing or intrusive. While the act of staying alive against all odds is scary on its own, you need to sweeten the deal by making the gameplay emulate the tension of a traditional horror film. Valve and Turtlerock Studios knew exactly how to handle this. Everything in Left 4 Dead is dedicated to keeping the players engaged through peaks of highly intensive dramatic moments, keeping the target audience coming back time and time again, experiencing new events in the same but highly detailed levels. Like a good horror film, you don't want your players to experience opposite ends of enjoyment, but rather a healthy middle. If the players go through a level without encountering enough challenge, they'll get bored. If they experience too much, they'll get frustrated and exhausted before finishing the campaign. In both scenarios, the players will end up leaving and the goal of replayability will not have been met. Therefore, the developers had to find clever ways to accomplish this. The first was through what they called dramatic anticipation. What that meant was to take the buildup of tension seen in classic horror films and apply it to moment gameplay. If you'll notice, the entire game revolves around these moments. For example, special infected make noises to alert the team to their presence, such as the smokers coughing or hunters growling. Immediately putting the group on edge to figure out where they could be, as they tend to hide amongst the background. Horde defense sections, also known as crescendo events, always start with the sound of infected shrieking in the background, letting the players know that they've been alerted and are on their way. Being vomited on by a boomer causes momentary blindness and summons a horde of infected that appear after a few seconds of buildup, leading the team to prepare for the incoming swarm. Yet, all this anticipation would be nothing without a payoff, and that leads to what the developers referred to as adaptive dramatic pacing. This is essentially their way of using the AI director to adjust game pacing on the fly. See, Left 4 Dead was born out of playtesting for Counter-Strike Source after the developers had fun fighting hordes of bots armed with knives. So much fun, in fact, that the team would add on to this game type and eventually have an early prototype in 2005. They realized that the pacing of a common match in CS were periods of quiet tension culminating with spiky moments of unpredictable intensity. That's what made each round exciting, a break in tension that blew up with loud gunfire. However, the use of the word unpredictable is key to understanding Left 4 Dead's unique pacing. If a player is aware of enemy spawn points, then it no longer becomes a game of survival, but of navigation. Players would easily speedrun through levels with pinpoint accuracy once they've played long enough, and the fear would be gone. Therefore, the AI director makes sure to encourage possible moments rather than giving the players everything all at once. This means that while anything can happen, that doesn't mean it always will. This was achieved through procedurally generating encounters and item variety throughout each level. The team couldn't generate an entire world full of infected at one time because that would require having possibly hundreds of unique infected that would eat into development time. Therefore, the AI director populates the same infected assets within what is called the active area set. The AAS is a circle that the survivor team is always in, meaning the more they move through the level, the farther that circle will go. As it does, it destroys the population of infected that was once in the circle, while spawning new ones in areas where the circle now rests in, ensuring the level is never empty, while allowing the developers to reuse the same infected over and over. What this means is that one playthrough of, say, the Dead Air campaign might see players encountering a witch as early as the first level, while another will have them blow through with no problem. While gamers may shudder at the thought of procedural generation, that's often because it's used to generate enemies and environments, where the latter is far more noticeable. A procedurally generated world, for instance, will probably be seen again because there's only a finite number of resources available. The benefit of having levels that don't change is the ability to mix up everything within it, and since players know what to expect from the environment, they're always left guessing what the actual game will throw at them. This creates moments that can only be experienced by that team at that time. This helped the developers achieve their goal of structured unpredictability, and keep the players of Left 4 Dead eagerly coming back for more. And the way it effortlessly came together is nothing short of amazing. This game had no right being as good as it was, and with the help of the modding community, it's only gotten better with time. Left 4 Dead will be remembered for years to come, and I think it's time the developers got the praise they so rightly deserve. But going through the development history was both interesting and slightly depressing. Interesting in how dedicated the two studios were in creating an authentic, horror-themed single-player/multiplayer hybrid, and the brilliant ways they went about it. Yet, it was depressing because this type of game is becoming rarer as time goes on. A title that focused on keeping players around without resorting to scummy addictive tactics to do so. No loot boxes, no needless padding, no experience points, no obvious half-finished content. Everything was there from launch, and everything at launch kept players coming back for more because the developers made sure every facet of this game worked towards that. In retrospect, it's funny how people began a boycott against Left 4 Dead 2 because they thought it was nothing more than rushed content, a way to make a quick buck a year after the original's release, but the groundwork was laid out so perfectly, development time for the sequel was probably made significantly faster. Between the procedurally generated infected, the AI director, and their ground rules for cooperation, they had everything ready to go. In fact, the procedural system was so good that the games only needed to work on one piece of code to change the population of every map, including those made by fans. So while Left 4 Dead 2 is seen as the series' high point, and for good reason, let's not forget where it all started, with a game that truly made cooperation a necessity, at a time where co-op games were slowly fading from obscurity. The gaming industry needed Left 4 Dead, and I hope my breakdown of its mechanics has shown you why it should continue to be known as an all-time classic. Hey everyone, I normally don't do these type of things, but thank you for watching and I hope you got your time's worth. If you did, feel free to subscribe and click the bell icon to be updated on every video. If you wish to support the channel even further, you could always support me on Patreon, but your viewership is more than enough. If you have any questions or suggestions, go ahead and leave a comment down below or follow me on Twitter. Keep on being you and have a great day.